So you're all here this evening to find out what your Italian wedding will cost. And I won't be able to tell you that exactly, but I'm going to give you hopefully lots of insights to help you plan your own budget. Because I have a vision for you. So it's Sunday night. I want you to be able to close your laptop, know that your wedding plans are fully on track and that everything is completely going to plan for your wedding. Your budget is completely clear and under control. And if you're honest, can you say that's where you are right now in your wedding planning? I hope that it is, but I have a feeling that for some of you, it's not. Maybe you can just pop a kind of message in the chat for me with how you're feeling about your wedding and your budget right now. So from planning weddings in Italy for a really long time, I know that the budget can be a really, really stressful part of planning. You might be avoiding conversations about your budget. You might be shopping for vendors that end up being way out of your price range. You might be procrastinating booking your vendors because you don't know what to spend. And you might just be living in fear generally that you're going wildly over budget. I really don't want this for you. I don't want you waking up in the night wondering what you've forgotten or overthinking or thinking of something else that you haven't actually added to your budget. Now, none of this is your fault. Like, you've not planned a wedding before, probably, and probably not in Italy. And planning a wedding in Italy is like no other project you will ever do in your life. But let me tell you, the trick is if you get this pricing and budgeting right, all of those feelings that you have are pretty much going to go away. 80% of the uncomfortable feeling of planning a wedding is not feeling in control of or knowing your budget. Let's get into it. Today, I was going to say, I'm not going to be able to kind of promise you a romantic fairy tale like your engagement probably was, but I am going to be able to give you a happy ending. I'm going to tell it like it is. I'm going to talk a lot, probably quite quickly at times because I get quite excited and have a lot to say. But stick with me because you'll want to hear what I've got to say. Many planners think I'm actually crazy for sharing this with you. They think that sometimes potentially it's a little bit irresponsible to share pricing when it varies so much per wedding. But you know that, like, you're not stupid. Prices are going to differ for so many reasons with a wedding. And a quote for one wedding should be completely different to the next. So I really want you to expect that in your planning. I can guarantee after the next 45 minutes, if I don't talk too much, you will have a more accurate wedding budget and a system of how to manage that budget. You'll have actionable money saving tactics, and you'll be confident with what you should spend on your wedding for each budget line. And I want you to know before we really get into it that I have great respect for your money and how you choose to spend it, because everybody is different. Everybody has a different budget. I had a 15 grand wedding budget when I had my Italian wedding. So, I was really baseline, low level. But I also have great respect for my peers and their talents and the value of those talents. And sometimes those things don't quite match up. So I want you to know that I really do respect your budget. Whatever you've got to spend is incredible. We will find a way for you to have the wedding that you want. Just quickly, I don't know if you've seen the Victoria Beckham documentary, but it's absolutely brilliant. Everyone should watch it. And I stole this. Who does she think she is? So who am I? Give me just 1 minute. I just want to tell you who I am and why I'm here talking to you about Italian weddings today. It started when I was 16 and I started my own floristry business. I always had a thing for business. I then trained as a florist. I then went to work at Oxfam in charity fundraising, and I managed the marketing of their bridal stores, which is selling secondhand bridal designer dresses. And I really loved it. So much so I used to try the dresses on at home for fun. This was before I was married. I think it'd be a bit weird now that I'm married. After I moved roles, I went on record saying that I would never, ever work in weddings again. But then I got engaged in Florence, and 9 months later, I had my own wedding in Italy, wearing a designer dress from Oxfam. And a year later, I launched Whisker and White, which is my planning business. And I ate my hat because clearly I love weddings. They have been a theme throughout my life. And now, 10 years after launching Whisker and White, I've produced hundreds of weddings of all shapes and sizes. And we're talking from 15K up to 600K. No matter the budget, I love the joy of watching people celebrate a wedding. Every wedding is important as the next. And I believe that everyone, all of you, should have access to clear and transparent information, whatever your budget is. The principles are the same. And I get really fired up from an anger that comes from hearing so many couples get lost in planning and say they feel overwhelmed, That's why we created La Lista, because I'm just so over hearing people struggle with their Italian weddings. And I just want you to have the most joyful time in your life. So I'm proud tonight to share a lot of information on budgeting. So let's finally get into it. I said I'd say it how it is. So sadly, everyone goes over budget. Literally, probably 95% of people go over budget. And that's because the budget that they set at the start of planning isn't actually a budget. It's a kind of rough lump sum of money, often a forecast that's based on misinformation. It's not realistic to what you actually want to have for your wedding. So I'm going to talk you through how you get that realistic budget. At the start of planning, I see lots of couples kind of like chuck in 5K here for a photographer, but your taste is a 20K photographer. You put in 5K in total for flowers, but you want a flower arch that's 5K alone. How do you get to the point where you're accurately pricing things at the start? At some point, you're going to have to decide to get that accurate pricing, and you can decide whether to do it right at the start of planning, or you can do it as you go through planning. And as you go through planning, if you do that, that's where you're going to trip up, because you're going to realize that the photographer that you want is a lot more. And at that point, you're going to have to decide whether you go over budget or you're going to settle for someone less. So I want you to accept that you really need a detailed budget and a system, and it's going to take some work for you to manage this. Even if you have a planner, it takes work to manage your budget, but this due diligence is well and truly worth it. Let me show you how. So this is our budget spreadsheet. This is nothing particularly fancy, but it works, and it has worked for me for hundreds of weddings now. So this is pretty much what I give my clients when we're planning our wedding. This is how I manage their budgets. So I'm going to show you around really quickly, and then we're going to come back to this and actually fill it out and talk about the price of different vendors. So this is the main budget, and here you can see, if we zoom in, all of the different vendors that you may have at your wedding. It's kind of what people generally have. It's pretty comprehensive, and in it you have a low column and a high column. So you have the lower price range of vendors and a higher price range. It doesn't mean it's the lowest price that you have for vendors, and it doesn't mean it's the highest. It just means it's kind of a general price point of a lower and a higher end. As I say, I'll talk about this as we move through the budget shortly, of kind of whereabouts you might fall. Then we've got a tab that's your payment tracker. So it's really important that you track every single payment that you make for your wedding, when you make it, what the vendor was called, the bank account that you used to make it, because believe me, when I plan weddings, if we don't track this, we get lost in it. So you need to know exactly what you've paid and when, because vendors aren't particularly good at remembering or recognizing when you've made payments later. And when you come to the week of your wedding, there will be a vendor that asks you when you made the deposit payment, and that's painful. So having it here is just a really good reference. You'll probably use that tab a lot. Then you've got the phasing tab. This tracks your savings or your budget for your wedding, which is the amount of money that you've got, and it tracks how much you think you might spend per month on your wedding. So it's kind of like a cash flow. So you can see this is how much money we've got in the pot, and this is when we're going to need to spend it. So contributions is commonly savings you've already got, or maybe some generous people in your family have gifted you some money. So there's your pot. And then savings per month, say you're going to save £2,000 a month, you kind of add that up. So you can see a total of your cash flow that's in the bank, your cash that you've got in your wedding budget pot. There's other months where maybe your guests pay you a deposit for their rooms at your venue, and I've popped that in as well. And then eventually you're going to forecast, based on which order you're going to book your vendors, how much of a deposit you're going to pay them and when. So you can see here I've got spend by month, and then very roughly when I'm going to pay the deposit for each of the vendors, and it goes all the way through your entire wedding. This is generally the order that people book vendors as well. So this as a template is quite useful to work to. And then you can see your net income. So you can just make sure you've always got money in the bank to pay your vendors. And if you haven't, and it doesn't quite work out, then you find a solution and make it work. So that is the phasing. And then there's just an end tab here, which is just decor, and it also has the lower and the higher end of things. So this is where you can see the real prices of real items for your wedding, and make a really good forecast from here for your decor eventually. That is the budget. This template comes free with the pricing guide, which we've been selling recently. So the pricing guide is available in our shop, and this pricing template, this budget, comes free with that if you buy the pricing guide. You've got this budget template, and you can make your own version of this, but just make something, because you seriously need to track this stuff. So you'll make or get your budget template ready, and then we're going to head back to my deck over here, and we're going to talk through the steps to actually staying on budget. So the first thing we're going to do is forecast your wedding. So this is before you've really done anything. So you might have just got engaged, and you might figure out, we think we've got about 60 grand for our wedding. Then you're going to run through that budget, and you're going to dump in some costs that you think things will be. So you might think at the start of planning that a photographer is going to cost you 4 grand, and you might think that catering is going to cost you 150 euro per person. And you're going to just like map that out bit by bit, knowing that it's probably not going to be accurate, but it's a really good start to get to a total amount. That is your first forecast. Then you're going to go out and get quotes from the real world. And you can do that by going through La Lista, where you will find there are some accurate prices on there from our vendors. We ask all our members in the directory to actually give a price for their service, so that you are guided by that. So you could use that as a good base to see what things cost, or you can reach out directly to the vendors themselves, which is also a good thing to do. So you find your vendors that you kind of sort of like, you reach out to them. I would say keep it limited, like reach out to 2 photographers, reach out to 2 videographers, reach out to 2 bands, because it does soon get overwhelming. It becomes a lot of emails, and it becomes a lot of things to track. So at this point, because you're probably not kind of like directly inquiring, you might not actually want to work with them. You're just trying to get a guide price at this point. You can also be transparent about that. You're just trying to kind of learn from these vendors, so they know that you're probably not going to be in a position to book quickly. They're not going to chase you up. They're not going to follow up with you. It's kind of a kind of respectful exchange of information. Like you might just ask for a brochure, for example. Then you get those costs, and obviously some of them are going to be higher than you have imagined and you've put in your budget. Maybe some of them are going to be lower. That hardly ever happens. But let's imagine we've got those prices, and we've got a reforecast column in that budget, and we're going to map in there what the price of things actually is. You'll get to the end, and you'll have what you thought things would cost and what things actually cost. And obviously at that point, you've got potentially a kind of tough moment to work out whether you need to change things up, because the budget really is the budget, and it's a kind of wake up call that we can't have everything we want, or we can't have potentially those vendors that we want. You either need to shop around a bit more and see if there are those style of vendors at that price point, or this is the time to unfortunately compromise and accept that you may need to prioritize a little bit more and really think about what the most important things are to you. Oftentimes people kind of change music around a bit. So you might start off with thinking, I really want a live band, but actually the quality of the live band I want is way, way above our budget. So how do we get that live experience into our wedding without spending 25 grand, which hardly anybody has? So you can shop around and find kind of musicians that can do that, or you could just pop in, you know, like I know a DJ with a live musician is more like 4 grand, and that's much more achievable for us than the 25k band, etc. So you're going to go through and fiddle that around a bit. You'll then hopefully get to a point where you have accepted where you've got to, and you've either managed to get kind of your budget down to nearabouts where you want it, or you have accepted, no, I really want that vendor or that quality of vendor, and because I now understand the value of them and that's how much they cost, I'm happy to raise my wedding budget to this new forecast. At that point, that is your budget, and truly, if you've done all of this hard work, you won't go over your budget, because you know, and you have real-time pricing of the types of vendors that you want plugged in. You've done the hard work and the compromising. One thing that you must have in that budget is a buffer. So every wedding still needs a buffer. You've done the hard work, but there will be things that you almost can't plan for, or you're going to think of things that you want further down the line. You're going to need to give yourself that space to have a bit of fun at the end of planning. You don't want your budget to be absolutely maxed out and completely allocated at the start, because there's no doubt that at some point you will think of something that you want to add. So you will see a trend, or you will hear of an amazing musician, or you want to surprise people with something, or the trip ups that I want to talk you through are often like a plan B. We talk about this a lot. Hopefully you won't do this, because you'll do your due diligence at the point of booking your venue. We've got an amazing guide in the club, our membership, which is about it's called our venue booking guide. So it's got every question and every single thing you need to check before you book your venue, so this doesn't happen. But commonly people don't fully think through the plan B when they book a venue, and they need to add something on later, some sort of tent of some sort. Sometimes the tent size changes, so you might have budgeted for your tent, but the reality of the logistics, once the company go and do the site inspection, the tent size changes, or there's some sort of logistical thing that adds a bit of money on somewhere. Another trip up is often additional hours of catering. So caterers work for 7 hours typically, and in our budget, that template, you have got additional catering spend as a bit of a buffer for that type of thing, but you might have to add on extra hours of the catering service or extra items in the menu. Another trip up is that in Italian caterers, they don't serve Prosecco for speeches, some things that people kind of commonly want. Some of them don't include the cake in their proposal. So there's some of these things that once you get into the details of your catering, you might realize that there's something that you need to add in, and that almost always comes up for people. So why not have a buffer for it now? Decor is really hard to budget for, really, really hard to budget for. And I think many people hope that decor is going to be somewhere they can cut back, and when they come to it, we'll be able to save money there. But actually the opposite tends to happen, and people want to add more, because by that point in planning, you've done all like the hard work, booked the big vendors, and you want to have some fun with the details. And the details tend to cost quite a lot of money, or they add up quickly, I think is the fair way to put it. Just don't skimp on the decor early on, and make sure that you've got this buffer there so that you're not so limited when you come to planning it. And that's that. So as you book your vendors, you're going to use your forecast. There's a committed column in this budget where you're going to write what you've actually committed to the vendors. You're going to track everything you spend in that tab that I showed you. You're going to save all your contracts, and you're going to screenshot all the payments that you make to your vendors as well, because as I say, at some point someone's going to ask you for that, and if you've just done it as you go, my God, is it so much easier for you? And you'll stay on top of things, because you'll know where you are. You know that you're safe in your budget. It will be working for you, and you won't be avoiding it. I'm going to move on and show you some real wedding budgets. So some of you might have bought our pricing guide already. If you have, I hope you're enjoying it. Inside that, we have this gorgeous wedding that I did happen to plan this summer at La Tonara di Scopello in Sicily. This wedding had a budget of 150k euro, and I'm just going to top line talk you through how their budget was split up. The budget excludes the venue fee, so this 150k doesn't include any venue fee, because we are thinking in a way where your guests are kind of covering the cost of your venue, because they're paying you back for their stay there. So this venue, La Tonara, is actually quite a big spend as well, quite a big cost. So you should bear in mind that this 150 is without that in it. So Meg and Ollie had 3 days of events. All of the events had food and drink, alcoholic drinks. There was a welcome night the night before, was a buffet, full wedding day, obviously, and then a beach day at La Tonara with pizza and an open bar. Their specific requirements, their priorities were fashion, content, and entertainment. So Meg and Ollie, spent a lot of money on their fashion. I think Meg had 3 different dresses on the wedding day. That was really important to them. That's where 30 grand of their budget went. They spent 30k on content, and that was just on photo and video. So they had an amazing team for that. They slightly deprioritized the decor. So even though they still spent 18K on it, Meg made really selective choices on the decor. So there was quite a little bit in the ceremony, but for example, she didn't have flowers on the table. There were areas that she was really smart about how to cut back on decor throughout the planning. Entertainment was really important, and they spent a lot of money on the band. So they flew a band over from England, and that comes with really quite a high cost. So for the band to perform, but also to hire their equipment, their staging, their flights, all of that added up to, well, 16K was for the band and their travel, and the 12K was for the sound and equipment hire. And they obviously had planner as well, which is a considerable cost. And a little nuance, they also had a tattoo artist at the beach day. So you can see how this budget was really weighted to what's important to them, and other people would spend their budgets really quite differently. I just wanted to stop a second and see if anyone had any questions, particularly about this wedding. Is there an ideal budget to have for La Tonara? So my general rule at the moment is, I think to have a comfortable wedding anywhere in Italy, having about €1,000 per guest is like an ideal budget. That's if you want to have 3 days of events, transport, good entertainment, quite a lot of things going on. If you want the full wedding with the 3 days, having at least €1,000 per guest is an ideal situation. And I know that's going to sound like a lot of money to some people, not a lot of money to others. A lot of budgets that we work with at the moment have £2,000 per guest. So it really is such a balance. Rosa asked, did you organise the content and the clothing? So as a planner, I worked with Megan on her fashion. So she showed me what she was considering having and doing, and that feeds into how we style an event. So it's important to see what that looks like to help us, create a look that's going to fit into. But she sourced all her clothing herself. And yeah, the content team, so it's our job to hire all of the vendors. So we put proposals together for our clients, they choose the vendors, and then we help obviously facilitate booking them, briefing them, etc. I'm going to move on to a slightly different wedding budget now. This is Amy and Jake's wedding. So this is in Tuscany. This is at a venue called Borgo Pietrafita, which I know a lot of the La Lista, the group, the community, a lot of you are getting married there. Really amazing venue. It's really good value venue, lots of good accommodation on site. And again, we are not including the venue in this kind of budget. The guests are kind of covering the cost of this venue. And it's really, really common for that model to happen. So almost every wedding that we know of, that we plan, the couples charge the guests something to stay. Now, it does depend on the venue. Sometimes that's not possible. Sometimes the venue cost is much higher than the couple want to charge the guest back for, and they kind of subsidize it. But on the whole, that is the mechanism. Amy and Jake also had 3 days of events. They had a pizza the night before, and then they had a barbecue the day after the wedding. They had 50 guests. And when we put this on Instagram, loads of planners were like, there's no way that you could do this budget. There's no way you can have a wedding on this budget. You 100% can, because we did and we do all the time. And I think lots of people in our La Lesta community do as well. You just have to be smart with your shopping and the vendors that you use. So they did do a lot of kind of self-catering, or they used partial catering, for example. So their pizza night, they had the pizzas, but they did their own bar from a wholesaler. They ordered all the drinks and they did their own bar. They had a lower cost content team, obviously, compared to Meg and Ollie. This was still 10K for a photographer and video duo, which is actually a really good way to make your budget go further. If you get a separate video and a separate photographer, that often costs more than if you get a team or a duo or even a single person that does both photo and video. It's got to be what's right for you. They spent less on clothing, they spent less on hair and makeup, like all very obvious. And interestingly, they spent a similar amount per person on food and drink. That is an area of wedding kind of budgeting that doesn't change so much. So obviously there's a range within catering of a low price and a high price, but the difference isn't as much as it is in most other budget lines, like from a photographer being so much lower. Like you can get a £2,000 photographer, you can get a £30,000 photographer. these price points in catering are going to be 20, 30 euros difference per person, which obviously adds up to thousands if you've got 100 guests, but the margins are really not that different. Have you got any questions about this lower budget that we can answer? Ali asked, to my earlier point, is the €1,000 per guest not including venue fee? So no, it's not. So that €1,000 per guest is your budget. So if I've got 100 guests, I'd have €100,000 wedding budget. We'll move on. So there are a couple of real weddings. So obviously my point is, you can have high budget weddings, you can have low budget weddings. It's possible to do it all, and there are vendors at all price points. So the wisest thing you can do is shop around. Also, obviously, use La Lista because we've got vendors of all shapes and sizes. And in our community, in the free community for couples, there's lots of recommendations of different vendors that you're all giving each other, which is lovely. And in the club, you can ask me directly for vendor recommendations as well. So if you've got a certain budget, a certain region, a certain thing that you're trying to achieve or get, I will pass over any of my vendor and venue recommendations as well. We're finally going to get to how to actually build a budget. So this is a bit where I'll probably talk quite fast and a lot and potentially trip over my words. We're going to build a budget together, and we'll go through stage 2, which is where we're reforecasting. So let's imagine we've done that base budget and we're going to forecast here. I'm going to go through a real wedding that I've got next year with you, so you can see real prices. But before you start budgeting properly, you need to know these things. You need to know your rough guest number. You need to know the region that you're going to get married in, or regions, and the season. You need to think about how many guests you're going to have sleeping at your venue, so you can work out that potential reimbursement fee from charging guests to stay there. You want to know how much you're going to be comfortable charging your guests to stay at your venue. This may change once you find your venue, because a lower quality venue, you might not want to charge guests as much as a higher quality venue, or like you'll work it out as you kind of see how comfortable you feel. But the general rule is, because I get asked this question a lot, how much to charge guests. I think you just go slightly above a hotel price. So if you look locally, a hotel is 150 to 200 euros a night for like really quite a basic room. My venue's nicer than that. My venue is going to give them breakfast. It's going to make their life easier because they're on site. So I'm comfortable charging 250 per room per night. Can all my guests afford that? Yeah, I think they probably can. That feels okay. Okay, that's your price point. You're going to know how many events that you're going to have, or you're going to aim to have. So are you having 3 events? Are you having 2 events? What are you going to manage there? And you're going to identify what I call the budget clangers. So you're going to think about in advance, what are the things that could go wrong and trip me up, which we talked about earlier. So it could be that I think I want a band, but I am well aware that bands can be much more. Transport is really hard to budget for. So I'm going to put this price point in, and then that could be a place that really gets me. But logistics is very important to the good flow of a wedding. So that's going to be a priority, etc. So we're going to have this base. And for our wedding, I think I put in that we're going to have 100 guests, but let's go through it. So I'm just going to move back to my budget. And as I do, I'm just going to tell you about the 3 things that come up a lot as well. So when people are talking about getting good value for weddings, they talk about seasonal variance. Now, I don't think vendor prices really change that much by season at all. You don't tend to have a brochure that says whether it's kind of spring, it's going to be cheaper than if it's in midsummer. Vendor prices change usually based on where they are. So if a vendor's already in Italy or in that area of Italy, doing another wedding, or they're there for the summer, that might bring their price point down. Or if they really want to work on your wedding, if there's something about it that's really particularly exciting for them, like a different venue that they'd like to work at, sometimes you can negotiate a little bit. The other thing is at the region that you get married in. This does affect the price of a wedding in Italy. And this is a bit of a generalization, but as a rule, I would say most of Italy is pretty much on an even playing field now, with the kind of lowest price points sort of matching and the highest price points sort of matching. So you can have those different price weddings in all regions. The regions that really stand out as definitely starting at higher price points are Amalfi and Como, I'd say, as a general rule, and Portofino probably. There's a few very obvious, I don't think that's going to be news to you, that those areas start at higher prices, and considerably higher prices as well, for catering, for bands, for sound equipment, for transport, almost everything that's major in a budget. And you have to bear in mind, in those areas, because it's more expensive to stay, it can also be really expensive for your vendors to travel there. So if they're coming from other parts of Italy or from other parts of the world, they are also going to be paying more to literally get there, sleep there, and that's all going to have a knock-on effect on your budget. So watch out there. I've seen people with really, really big budgets make the decision to shift region from those regions so that they can just get more for their money in other regions of Italy. So what we've got is your low and your high, which we briefly looked at earlier. So we can just hide those for now because they are a guide. And I'm going to unhide my blue bit. So this isn't in the template that you would get, but I have populated our forecast. So this is, imagine that I was at stage 1 that we talked about, where I went through and allocated some relatively random guesstimates to my budget. And my budget came in at 101,000 euros. So that's 101,000 euros for 100 wedding guests at a venue in Sicily that can sleep 30 people, with this guest contribution, which is where guests are paying us back for the room, being 30,000 euros. So that's what I thought when I started planning. Then I went out, learned more about weddings, got my quotes back, and I realized the venue that I'm booking is what my budget was. So my 35,000 euros, that's quite a kind of normal price point for wedding venues now. You can get wedding venues that are 8 grand for 3 nights. You can get wedding venues that are 100 grand for 3 nights. The sort of 20 to 45,000 euro is a good range to think about when sleeping between 30 and 50 guests in one place. So this price point was 30,000. Was there a wedding venue fee at this venue? No. There is a fee for having an event. So they want to charge me 500 euros for coming back and having a pool party because they have to book another cleaner. So I'm going to suck that up and add that to my budget. So that's an unexpected cost that I didn't have last time. Symbolic celebrant. I don't need a celebrant because my friend or family member is going to be the celebrant. And on this occasion, I've got an amazing uncle who wants to stand up and do my ceremony for me. Wedding catering, I'd budgeted 160 euro a person. And amazing, I found this amazing caterer. They are 160 euro a person, but I'd forgot to put on the tax. And the tax is 10%. So I'm going to add on a 10% tax for my catering. The bar is a separate company. So I'm going to put on a quote that I've had from them, which is actually 45 euros per person for 3 hours of bar, which is a good benchmark for you guys. So this is one of the types of vendors that significantly changes how they quote things. Every single bar company you speak to will charge very differently for the bar. There's an amazing company in Tuscany called Mercury Bar who are extremely low price for this amazing bar service that they do. There's another one in Puglia that charges kind of per drink instead of per hour. So there's all these different models. A 45 euro per person 3-hour bar service is quite a good benchmark. So I'm going to put that in. And I'd actually thought it was going to be more than that. So that's great. That's great for me. I've got my catering extras line, which we talked about earlier. I'm going to keep that in because at this point, I don't actually know what's going to come up. I might go to my tasting with my caterer and I want to add something in, or there isn't something included. So I'm going to keep that. I've got my SIAE tax, which is a music tax in Italy that you have to pay for having events. So that is what it is, and I'm keeping that in. I, at this point, don't really know what music I want. It's quite hard to know. So I'm thinking I'll probably have something at the ceremony and then maybe speakers for the rest of the day. So I've looked online and strings are between 2,000 and 5,000 euro. So I think I'm going to be able to go somewhere in the middle on that. And this is a good place I can save a bit of budget and recoup some of that tax that I paid on the catering. I've quantified that my DJ cost is going to be 2 grand. That's all fine. But I'm going to bring my DJ across from England, and I need to hire sound equipment for them because I've decided that I can't compromise. I really want this DJ. So I need sound equipment for them. And I can't get a quote on that until much nearer the wedding. So typically sound, lighting and florists, it's quite hard to get quotes until a lot nearer your wedding. So I'm just going to put in what Lucy's told me in the club, or what another bride has told me that they roughly spent on their sound, so that I've got a good price in there. Decor, I'm gonna have to lean in here because I've spent quite a lot on my music hire equipment, so I'm gonna try and spend less on my decor. Classic thing that happens in planning. I'm going to lean into the catering, so they include loads of great stuff in their proposal for free, so I'm going to use as much of that as I can and try and reduce my decor budget a bit. I've spoken to a florist that I like, and I know that their minimum spend is €5,000, so maybe I've gone and plugged that into this decor budget and just thought about what this total cost comes in at, so that I feel really confident that that 12 grand isn't going to screw me over, basically, and I'll be able to have what I want for that. Stationery, I really love stationery, but it's expensive, and I'm going to invest in my invites and give everyone an amazing invite, and then the on the day stationery, I'm going to use the assets that I've got from my invite and make my own wedding day stationery. So I know that €1,000 is okay for my invites because they're really important to me, and maybe my mum. Photographer, I found the one I want. They are at the price point I imagined. Videographer, it's not a priority for us. I've thought maybe about having a content creator. They range from 2 grand to 6 grand. That's a bit more than I thought they would be. Maybe they could be something that I add on later and they fit in my buffer further down the line. Hair and makeup, I've got a quote for that and it fits my budget. Great, etc., etc. So you get to the point where this is complete. I won't go any further. There is an area that often people pull back on, and that's the welcome event. So as you can see, there's a few places that I've spent more throughout that reforecast. So I might need to think about where I pull back, and a pre-event catering is quite a good place to do that. So you might have thought at the start, I really want to have food and drink at my pre-event, but actually, it's all getting a bit expensive. Having an aperitivo for a pre-event is such a good hack, because you most of the time just want to get people together and you want to get them mingling. So just having drinks and nibbles for a couple of hours, sometimes like from 5 o'clock to 7 o'clock before people need to be fed for dinner, you can do that on a really quite a low budget if you find the right place. So sometimes it's €20, sometimes it's €35 for a few drinks per person, and a really sexily called a reinforced buffet, which is more than just crisps. It's little bits of sandwiches, little pizzas and things like that. So this is a really good hack, I think, as a way to kind of claw back some money. Anyway, the long and short of it is you get to the point where fantastically we have the budget. Ta-da! You can sort of see very quickly there how I've kind of worked through and added my real-time pricing, made a few compromises, and hopefully eventually got to a budget that's around about the same point as my original budget was, because that's all I've got. I've got 100 grand. That is more than enough money to spend on my wedding. That's all I've got. So I really need to make this work. And my contingency is in there. So if I really have got to this point where I've got to a budget of 85 grand, personally, that is going to be just such a comfortable place to be, because I know that even with a good budget, you are going to have things that come up that you kind of want to splash on. So having that little bit of leeway in your budget is just such a dream place to be. And it won't be true for everyone, but it hopefully will be true for lots of you. We've built our budget, and I think we're in a good place. So let's move on to the final part. I was going to just talk about the price of vendors very quickly. And I'm really sorry to say that with pricing, if it seems too good to be true with a vendor, it probably is too good to be true. And I feel quite harsh for saying that. But so many vendors look good these days. Instagram pretty much makes everybody look really good. But there are clear ways that you can find out if a vendor is going to be good. And the main ways, 4 ways, are how you connect with them. So at this early stage, we've talked about, you're just getting quotes. But when you get to the point of booking your vendors, you should really interview most of them. And again, I know that's really time consuming, but these people have such an influence on your wedding day. You want to have a connection with them because they basically feel like, as on the day, they all feel like your guests, and you want them to fit in and be a nice kind of crowd of people to be around. You want to ask about their process. You want to know that they've got a process that they can really clearly and easily explain to you, because it shows that they're experienced and they know their stuff. You want them to have the right attitude to your wedding as well. Like, I personally think that every vendor should act like you're the one and only wedding that they're going to plan, and that they're going to come to it and give it absolutely everything that they've got, because it is your one wedding, and they should treat it like that. They should have reviews that they can share with you, either Google reviews, or they could have testimonials potentially in their brochures. You can even ask if they can put you in touch with ex-clients if you really want to get into it and find out what it's like to plan with them. You'll see in our community a lot of couples ask other couples if they've worked with certain vendors to get those reviews as well. And obviously see a contract before you book. Everyone should have a contract, and you should check that before you get close to actually signing it. And it should be a good contract. And if you want to know what a good contract is, I've got some examples in the club as well. And I always say that if you can't have what you really, really want, then I wouldn't compromise and have like a budget version of what you want, because it probably will disappoint you. It might be better to just save that money and invest it, making something else really, really good, than having a kind of sub or budget version of what you want. So I'm just going to cover what you actually came for, which is the trip ups. I know you want to know where people get tripped up, where money is wasted, and how to get good value for your wedding. The trip ups, we've touched on venue rules or costs that are unclear at the point of booking. Just expect it, that every venue, there's probably going to be a small cost that comes up that you didn't fully read in the contract, or that you didn't maybe quite know about. But get that venue guide in the club, because it really does have every question I ever ask venues before I book them. Another trip up is trusting the wrong people with your budget. So setting an unrealistic budget at the start is the biggest pitfall that you can fall into. And unfortunately, sometimes planners don't put enough emphasis on this part of the budget. And I've done it before too. So it's really important that if you have a wedding planner, you are making sure that you're using their expertise right at the start to go through this with you. It's their job to build this budget for you in the most accurate way that they can, for them to get to know you, to get to know what you want, so that they can make that budget as good as possible for you. Another trip up is following the old path of planning a wedding, which is going through chronologically, booking each of your vendors. So we don't do that anymore. We don't go venue, photographer, caterer, videographer, one by one. We go, let's get quotes from everyone, so we know where we are and we know what everyone's actually going to cost. And once we know that, we can make decisions all at once. So you're taking your budget, like we have done, from estimates to quotes, so that you're really informed when you're making those budget choices and booking those vendors. If you're booking a photographer, and then you're booking your caterer, and then you book your videographer, when you get to those last three things, if they're all over budget, what are you going to do? So we don't book in order anymore. We book all together if we can, or at least based on priority and importance to you. We don't say yes to over budget things at the start of planning. So we don't follow a trend where everything's over budget, because we know that that's going to push us over budget, and we take accountability for that. And we make sure taxes, the right taxes, are budgeted early on in your budget. So you can do it the way I do it, where you basically add 10% for everything. But in Italy, there's two tax points, 10% and 22%. And some vendors have a 22% tax point, which obviously can really significantly change the price. Sometimes when I'm shopping for my clients, I've got to show them, this vendor and this vendor, you really like both of them. Maybe they're really similar in style, and this one's going to cost you an extra 10% because they've got a 22% tax rate, and that tax rate can come into your decision making with who you book. So make sure you're always clear on what someone's tax rate is. Where money is wasted, overpaying for vendors. So paying more than then you need to, or you should. How do you quantify the price of things? You've got my budget now in here, the low and the high price point. You can quite clearly see when something's at the higher end. Only you know whether you feel like that is worth it for you. Everybody places a different value on different services and products. Another area money is wasted is paying for things when the exchange rate, your exchange rate, is weak. So there's certain banks that you can get, even with Wise, you can transfer a certain amount of money when your exchange rate is strong and leave it in that bank account. So you can make the most of that good exchange rate day or week and just build up that bank account with the money exchanged into euros. Do not pay for everything at a particularly bad moment in the exchange rate. Be clever with it. Either get ahead of it and start changing it when it's good. If things are starting to tank and look bad for your exchange rate and it's going like that towards your wedding, see if you can pay for things earlier so that you're not losing more and more money as you go through planning. Final thing is unnecessary items and services. So I know this is really hard to kind of understand at this point what's unnecessary in your wedding or not, but having an experienced planner by your side or someone to coach you through this is really, really helpful here, because a lot of people add on or have a lot of things in their weddings that I know like don't do anything. So it's often trends or certain things that just aren't going to add anything to your wedding, but the internet makes it seem like they are. The things that really make a difference are things that give your guests a good experience in terms of like where they stay, good transport. Think about them and how the day flows. Certain types of music are really good, but I've found recently that when people have had a lot of things in their wedding, like they think they've got to do it all, that actually takes away something from their wedding itself and the experience. So if you want to get more into the detail on this, throw me a question, or I'll also be in the club shortly answering questions on this. So come on in there and I'll tell you what the things are that I think are basically a waste of money. And how to get good value for your wedding. Relationships are key, often through a well-established planner. Planners build really good relationships with vendors, and that can get you better prices or just access to better services. So it's not always that planners can get reduced fees, but they can sometimes get added value for you. Shopping around, not kind of just using the same old vendors that are recommended to you or the vendors that lots of people talk about. There are so many vendors out there, and there's new ones all the time that are cropping up. And obviously new vendors sometimes come with a bit of a risk because they don't have a lot of experience, but if you're asking them the right questions and you're getting enough from them, then they can be a really good way to save some money on your budget. You just need to weigh up your risk and how important that vendor is to your wedding, how much of a risk you're willing to take on them. And not paying commission is another way to get good value. So there's lots I can say on commission, but essentially, if you go directly to your vendor and get a quote, or if your planner does not add commission on vendor prices, you are going to save money on your wedding. Go and read more about commission. It's totally fine if it's transparent, but there are ways that it can add more money to your budget. And I think that's everything. Crikey, I'm just going to have a quick look in the comments here, see what questions we've got. Anna asked earlier on, I think for Amy and Jake, how could they manage to have such a little budget for food and drinks? I'm going to guess that that was for Amy and Jake and what they were doing for their wedding. They had a good caterer, a really, really good caterer in Tuscany that actually includes catering and bar at a normal price point. That's what I mean by shopping around. There are so many vendors out there, and this is a really good one that lots of people use. Their price point is just really, really good. For wedding catering. Which caterer did they use? This was Italian Taste Lodoviki. So they are actually extremely good value because they offer their bar service also included in the price of their wedding fee, which is pretty much unheard of for the quality of the bar that they offer. Are there venues that allow not a full book out? Yeah, so like you could have accommodation, or typically it's hotels that offer you to book part of their venue, but then obviously you have to compromise and potentially have other people on site. You might have exclusive areas of that venue, but you won't have kind of a full takeover of it. all these sorts of vendor recommendations. So a lot of these great vendors are already on La Lista, on our directory. And in the club, I'm answering questions like this all the time, giving my members exactly direct links to these types of vendors that are just shortcuts that, you know, I've done the hard work. I've found all of these vendors for you over the years, and there are hundreds and hundreds of them. So that's my job in the club. I really want to make this the most joyful time of your life, like I said at the start. I've jammed so much into this session. Thank you for bearing with me, but I just basically want to be by your side through it all. That is my passion, to help as many of you as possible. And we've got it with La Lista. You can obviously access that at any time with free information. But with the club, I can be in your pocket all the time, answering these questions. So every single day, at the moment in our community in Facebook, I am answering questions like this for my members. Everything from the timings of a wedding to what comms to send your guest, how to word those comms, what events to have, what time to have events, what vendors to book, vendor recommendations, venue recommendations, anything you can think of. There is no question that is too big or too small. To join, you're going to get an email directly after this session with a link inviting you to join the club. Obviously, come on in if you want to. I'm going to go over there now in the next 5 minutes and answer questions directly for my members who are here in this session. And we have sessions like this every 2 weeks on a range of different subjects. Also just a live Q&A, so you can jump on with me every 2 weeks and ask me questions about your specific wedding, which I like to get to know and get into. And I will give you advice that's directly helpful to you as a couple, and I get to know you and what you want to achieve for your wedding. So I just asked to do me a huge favor at the end here, and with the time that I've given you tonight, can you just tell me in the chat if I have helped you, if I have given you information that is going to be helpful for your wedding, if you like your budget a little bit more now, potentially, or what was the best bit of advice that I've given you. That would be so helpful. Hopefully we can do this again. Amanda says she loves the club. Thanks, Amanda. Exchange rate advice. It's a lot, isn't it? It's a lot. And I just want to reassure you that obviously it's so doable. It is a project, having an Italian wedding, even if you have a planner. It is a lot of work, but it is so, so worth it. And I can say that having done it myself and got married in Italy, but I can also say that with every single one of my clients that goes through it, by the time they get to their wedding and they have that experience, oh my God, is it so worth all of this planning? It is the best experience that you'll ever have in your life, I think. So I'm going to leave it there. Thank you so much for joining me this evening. I am now going to head over into the club. So I'll see some of you there. And thank you for being here. Have a good rest of your evening.